Hello, and welcome back to another webinar with Lindley. It's been really interesting, actually, the conversations that we've been having back and forward about this. So you all know me, I'm Sam Jones from IT Simply, the best IT company in the legal industry in New Zealand, and we've got Practice Intelligence, of course, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, because today we're going to be talking about strategy. From the surveys that Lindley and I put out, it came back, the top 9 things were about people. It's really interesting because if you've got a really good strategy, then a lot of those things disappear, or at least come down a little bit, or a lot. And so we thought we'd get into the strategy to talk about that because it has a big effect on the rest of the firm. And part of that is getting everybody onto the same page. So the strategy not needs to just be developed, but it also needs to be shared and explained and have buy-in on it. Would you agree, Lindley?
Yeah, absolutely. And the points that we want to make today basically are we want to talk to you about what happens when you don't have a strategy. You don't have a strategy in place and all of the bad things that happen for that. We want to talk to you about kind of do's and don'ts about what strategy is and what it isn't and what you shouldn't be doing. And we also want to talk to you about some things about how to do it and what you should be doing as far as the how goes. And we want to kind of address some of those issues that came up in the surveys, things like not being on the same page, people getting distracted by shiny things. We want to talk about those things as well. So for me, the main reason why it's so important to do a strategy is because people don't realize, or organizations don't realize, people in organizations don't realize that staying the same is not an option. If you keep doing the same thing all of the time, you're not staying in the same place from an industry perspective or from your business perspective. You are actually sliding down. You're sliding down from a productivity, you're sliding down from a marketing, you're sliding down from a revenue perspective, you're sliding down all of the time if you just keep doing what we've been doing all of the long. And that's a
Right.
really bad place to be. So Sam,
Yes.
what else? Why is it else important for us to do strategies?
Well, I think something that sets the scene is one of the firms we were working with, a consultant they had come in to work with them said there's a very big difference between running a law business and a bunch of people hanging around practicing law. Right? And that sounds like
Absolutely.
that was the words, not mine. But if you to run a legal business and get to your goals, you need that strategy. Because what we see is a lot of strategies are worked out with that big weekend away that the partners have. We've had our strategic meeting, and the partners will buy into it. We're deciding, in my analogy, which port to go to with which cargo. So it makes the most money, hopefully, but it also sets out within our values and our and the rest of it. So we see it in that weekend or being worked out once a year, but is it shared throughout the firm? Does everybody know where we're going and why we're going there and what is expected of them to be able to get to that other point? So I think we sort of see a strategy almost like some companies that have their mission statement written but really read.
Yeah, or not living on value or on mission as an organization. And
Yeah.
as you and I were talking, it does make it the ability for the firm to quickly make decisions about things. When a strategy is in place, then decision
Yes.
making happens way faster, and it's
Yes.
on strategy, and it gets the firm to where you need to go. When
Yeah.
you don't have a strategy in place, there's the decision making's all over the place.
And it's personal. This is my personal impression rather than the business strategy. So I quite often joke, you've heard me say it before, partners in a law firm should not decide on what color to paint reception,
Yeah,
right?
or the
Because
toilet
that's
paper.
part of your brand strategy. It's part of your what you say out. You've got a really. I've seen this before in another industry where they have a really flash website, and then you come in and the carpet's a bit threadbare and the furniture's are all old. That's a mismatch of trust because the strategy hasn't been followed in that.
Yeah.
So the strategy is incredibly important. I think all law firms we work with, I talked about this last week. I was in Auckland and Hamilton. I talked about this with clients and other law firms I visited. And the strategy part is, a few of the firms don't have a budget. So the manager's like, how do I I don't know, there's a new manager. How do I not have a budget? So that all that needs to be strategized. Most people get nervous around making decisions as well. So if decisions are made around the strategy, then everyone's on the same page. And if everyone's on the same page, you've got a lot better unity within the firm.
Absolutely, 100%. And the thing that came up about not being on the same page was one of the things that came up in the survey, right? And
Yeah.
when you're not on the same page, that allows and you open the door for people to get distracted by shiny new things, get
Yes.
distracted and do their own personal stuff, their own personal goals, as you said, right? So it's really important to have that strategy. So you close the door to those things.
Yes. And it was a chat with the manager, one of the team managers rather than a general practice manager, about micromanagement, because they find themselves micromanaging. So they came into the meeting and had a bit of a chat about the fact that they micromanage people because they were frustrated because they felt the team wasn't on the same page as them to get to the goal they were trying to get to. So it's micromanaged, which nobody likes to be micromanaged. I think the comment for somebody was, we hire very intelligent people and then micromanage them like they're children. If they're really intelligent people, give them the strategy, give them the goal, let them do what they do really well. You've also always got to have those reviews in place and the KPIs in place. That's really important. They've got to know what's expected of them. But certainly micromanaging them isn't going to make them work any faster.
Yes. So let's talk about the do's, right? KPIs, a do when it comes to strategy, right? If you do not have an understanding of what the performance metrics are for your organization, then yep, there's an issue, right?
So
that's
how do you
part of your strategy. Well, how do you come up with
it? Here's the analogy we talked about the other day when we talked about doing this presentation. I brought the analogy of the Bugatti Veyron, which is a 1,000 horsepower supercar. When they decided, because Lindley said something like, if you've got more than three, is it more than three strategies? You don't have a strategy.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Don't even get there. That's my
stuff. I just ruined the whole thing. We're going to cut this short.
No, you're fine. Just keep going.
When it was on Top Gear, I think, and they were talking about it. So once they had said it's going to be 1,000 horsepower, a lot of the other decisions they were having to make already were made, because if you have a 1,000 horsepower car, it has to have a certain size of brakes, it has to have a certain size of fuel tank, it has to have certain safety features in it. All those things are predetermined. So if we have a really strong strategy, a lot of our other decisions are already made. If we've got a strategy to double our workforce, then we need to have bigger premises.
Exactly.
That decision is already made. So we need to move offices. So that's our strategy isn't to move the office, it is to accommodate twice as many people.
Exactly. Right. And if you decide that the organization, the firm is going to go after a particular goal, for example, like being the go-to firm for a particular industry, like viticulture, like farming, like whatever it is, if you're going to make that a goal, then all sorts of other things are also decided. KPIs are also decided on the way because of the fact that you are making that your goal. You just work down from, if we do this, it means that we have to have this in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that viticulture example, if we're going to be the law firm for viticulture, then that decides on what conferences we go to, what firms we look at buying. So our then goal isn't saying, are we going to buy any firms this year or buy whatever, merger or whatever. It is to be number one in viticulture. And if that then throughout the year comes up at saying, actually, if we got that law firm out of Marlborough, where there's a lot of viticulture course, then that would then suddenly give us a really good market share.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And as you said, what else does it affect? It affects how we market, how we do events. What else?
Yeah, exactly.
Promotions.
Probably not sending bottles of wine to your really good clients, because that would be a bit funny, but if you're in viticulture. But it just takes all those decisions out. So quite often when I talked to one of the firms last week, they had acquired another law firm. And I said, how was the decision made? It caused a bit of a rift in the firm because 2 of the partners out of 5 didn't want to buy it. But a strategy would then say, if you had a strategy to say we're growing or we want to be number one in this or we want whatever, then the decision isn't the partner saying, do you want to or not want to? Is that part of our strategy?
Exactly.
So then you don't
Is it on strategy or off strategy?
Yeah.
Super easy decision, right? And
Yes.
and that's a really awesome thing to do. Now, one of the things that Sam had mentioned earlier was the fact of making sure that you have a focused strategy. So we don't want, one of the other do's is to make sure that you are on focus, which means in my world, 3. So no more than 3 goals, no more than 3 things that you're doing. In fact, for people who are really good, they narrow that down to potentially 2 or potentially just 1. Because as we talked about, if you're going to try to be the number 1 firm or the go-to firm for an industry like viticulture or farming or whatever, then just that focus means all sorts of other things. You can't really put your attention on a bunch of other goals. That should be it, because there's a relationship of all sorts of other things in the firm need to all be on that strategy. If you have 3, an example of this, a very big business decides that they want to have Richard Branson come and speak to their industry or their business, and they're going to pay him $500,000. So they contact him through his administrative assistant, and the admin person comes back and says, no, Richard Branson will not do that. And then they countered and said, we'll pay him $1 million. It'll be 45 minutes. And the answer was no. And then they upped it and they said, look, this is really, really important to us. So we'll write him a blank check and we're going to send our jet over to pick him up. He will be on the tarmac for no more than 45 minutes. He will be on that plane back, and we will fly him back to wherever he needs to go. And then the executive assistant for Richard Branson says, you don't seem to understand. He has 3 goals this year. One of them is not public speaking.
Right.
And that is it. Now, Richard Branson has done lots of public speaking events, just not in that particular year.
Right.
And that's focus. And that's dedication to that focal point that you've made your decision on. So it's incredibly easy to get distracted when there isn't that focal point. But when that focal point comes through, whatever shiny new thing comes, it's like, no, because it's not this. We've made this decision. We're sticking to this decision. Now, we do know that there's some exceptions. We do have to be a bit flexible.
Yeah, so don't lock it down too tight, right?
Right.
So you hire a manager. You've got a manager. They do the day-to-day business stuff, business as usual, to keep it going.
Yep.
The strategy would be something that everybody's involved in. And if you lock it down too tight, then that doesn't give you flexibility. But the decisions you make throughout the year should be based on that strategy. Hiring staff, changing offices, buying another firm, marketing, branding, all that stuff goes back to that
training up your staff, upskilling, right? Because for example, we have situations like COVID.
Yeah.
Nobody saw that one coming, right? And the thing about it is you can't sit there and go, I'm going to throw out the entire strategy because there's this worldwide pandemic. You have to go, how can the strategy work in this new environment?
Yes.
Right? It might also be, for example, a change in government regulations. It might be a change in industry regulations. I don't know. The thing about it is if the environment changes, instead of throwing out the whole strategy, you have to ask the question, how can it work in that new place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think when you have a strategy, it should be something that is talked about at the monthly meetings and amongst how are we going. And that was what I was going to bring up. How do you then say, well, this is our strategy for the next 12 months? It's usually 12 monthly. What are our waypoints? Right? What are the points that we need in the first quarter? What has to happen in the first quarter for us to get to our strategy? What has to happen in the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter to get to our strategy? So you can see how you're progressing and see what support the management team need throughout the year to make that happen. If we need some more lawyers to be looking at mergers or acquisitions, or we need whatever else, what do we need to put in place to make that happen? And then if those things do come up, so we do find a firm in viticulture that we could potentially buy or merge with, then we need the resource to be able to do that. So one of the really important things about a strategy is it needs to be resourced and not just left on the manager's desk.
Exactly. Which means that things must be measurable, right? You need to understand, as Sam said, milestones. You need to have measurements of success. You need to have measurements of accomplishment. You have to understand what comes before what. You need to have all of that created, understood, written down, etc., because of the fact that once you are in that process, it then flows much easier. You have a lot less stress when it is all there. Nice procedure, nice strategy, tick, 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 nicely along. And when shit happens, as it does, it's easier for you to be able to manage that when the rest of the strategy is still in place. That you can flex, you can switch things around because the rest of it is all there. Without it, you stress out. And that's no fun.
It's not fun. And I think that's the part that we're really concerned about when we did the survey, is that 9 out of the top 10 things that really annoyed people was all about people. It was the biggest frustration, it was all about people. Put a really good strategy in place, share that strategy, live that strategy, and everybody's on the same page and know what to achieve. If we're behind on our strategy, what do we need to do to catch up again? So not making an excuse that we're a bit behind at the halfway point, but what has to happen in the next quarter to come back up again. And with the tools you've got today, say if you were wanting to be the biggest law firm in viticulture in New Zealand, then at your strategic meeting, you can talk about what firms would you approach, what firms you know are off the table, etc. Google's there now. It's much easier to do that sort of stuff now than then. But it is then, what does that industry look like? What's the size of it? What is the opportunities? Where are we going to speak, etc.? So it's a really exciting thing to do that and be on the same page. Here, we love it, right? We just look after law firms. We look after a lot of law firms. So we get to know the things that people are going to call us about when it comes to IT. We know the things to talk about in IT because of practice intelligence. We then get a really big insight into the performance of the firms in law. So it's great. It's excellent. But we don't see a lot of law firms that go, we do that. That's what our expertise are. So maybe it is. That doesn't need to be your strategy, by the way. Your strategy can be to double in size. It could be to more time off a year. I doubt that would be one, but it could be whatever. What drives it? I think the biggest thing is you need to find
revenue. Yeah. It could be revenue. It can be upskilling your team. It could be you're number one on Google. All sorts of things can increasing clients, the actual client capacity. All of those kinds of things can be part of the strategy of the goals for the year, right? Now, right. Sam, when we talk about measurements, though, because I know practice intelligence, that's one of our really important measurement tools, right? To actually be able to look at the measurements, the numbers, the actual things that we would be doing.
Yes. Absolutely. There's one especially if you're going to go for growth, which is how many say new matters for residential property we have per year, and how many did we have up until last night? So up until last night, if we have had 100 new residential conveyancing matters opened, and that was 100 up until last night, and then we're aiming to double that, then it's pretty easy to see that growth. So it's easy to drill down into that department you want to really grow. Maybe you want to grow your commercial property or your commercial or litigation or whatever it is. Right. So you can actually see that growth. Then if your strategy is around having a higher hourly rate or better profitability, the benchmarking that we've just launched, you can see it in there. Actually, as an industry leader, we'd like to increase our hourly rate or whatever that is. You can see it. So you can actually measure it incredibly well. And then everyone's on the same page. Partners and managers can see that every day being updated. How are we tracking? It gets really exciting when you're on strategy, when you're on task for your strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
there's a couple of things though that I think is really important as well. Is don't like we've got a few firms that when we put practice intelligence in, everybody meets budget by a long way, right?
Whoops.
Unfortunately, that's not reality. So you've set that firm had set their budgets to make everyone feel great. Now we want people to feel great, but we also want people to be challenged because some people need that challenge. So when you set your targets, whatever that is around your strategy, is make sure it's realistic. Make sure it does push a wee bit to say we need to really put our hammer down to do this really well. I think that part's a lot of fun, and I don't see that fun in all law firms that we deal with. But having that strategy and sticking to it is incredibly rewarding. And figuring out how to get that strategy across the line in the 12 months,
Yep,
or whatever time frame you've given yourself is right. But measuring it, here's our strategy. Here's what you're responsible part for it. You're a junior solicitor, you're a mid solicitor, whatever, senior solicitor, consultant. Here's what we need you to do to get to that destination.
well, let me comment just briefly about the fact of when you have a budget that everybody knows that they can make. I'm going to tell you right now, you are doing a huge disservice to your members of your team, and here's the reason why. If you know that you can do something and you do it, do you sit there and pat on yourself on the back and feel really confident about yourself and have pride in your work because you did something you already knew how to do? Like if I go out and ride my bicycle, do I sit there and go, oh, wow, I rode my bicycle today. Wow, that's amazing. No, that's not what happens. If you do something that's just slightly outside your comfort zone, so you're kind of stressed out and you're pulling your hair a little bit, right? Not distressed, not like completely getting sick and all sorts of things like that. But when I push you just that pressure point, just beyond your comfort zone, and you accomplish something, now you get that feeling of pride. You get the feeling of self-confidence. So if you're sitting there allowing all of your staff to, or all of the people in your organization to hit their budget all of the time, again, huge disservice. You are literally robbing them of an amazing feeling of self-pride when you do that. Please stop.
Yeah. And for those ones who really want to beat their budget by 20%, because they're your superstars, those who have seen Practice Intelligence, when I talk about your superstars, your stars, and your others, Lindley has other titles for them, but superstar, stars, and others. Wow. If I'm a superstar and can't beat my budget by 15% because I'm really pushing myself, then I don't get that exhilaration because I'm probably quite competitive. If I am then the star and I'm just making budget because I'm really pushing myself, then I know that I've achieved what you wanted me to achieve. If I'm not achieving budget, I want some help. And we kind of ignore the others sometimes. We don't need to manage them out. We've talked about this before, but we need them to try to make that budget because the superstars feel like they're carrying the weight. They're the ones who will leave.
Amen.
It won't be.
Amen. And so you will be stuck with a bunch of others, and you do not want to be stuck with a bunch of others.
I've had, when I worked in the accounting industry, I had firms who would ring me after a presentation and say, we're just a bunch of the others. That's all we've got as staff. We've got no succession plan in here whatsoever. What can we do? And I'm like, I'd call Lindley. She'll help figure that out.
And we are going to have a webinar about how do you solve underperformance issues. We are 100% doing that because it's super important.
Included in that will be how do you hold a review meeting with your team? Because it's incredibly important. The only thing that's massively variable in any law firm is it's all full of people.
Yeah.
AI hasn't taken away yet.
Yeah. So we have also now just kind of talked about some of the other issues that came up with in the survey about, like, for example, when people do not have strategies that are updated or measured on an annualized basis. So we've talked about how important it is, regular milestones, quarterly, monthly. For me, it literally is a quarterly, monthly, down to weekly. And so for me, top priorities for the day, week, month, quarter, half year, and year. And so I break mine all down. And when I work with organizations, this is my expectation of what would be happening in an organization, because that's how you run a business.
Yes.
Really? Yeah. Yeah, and then another one that came up on the thing was lack of decision making on strategic objectives. Again, it's one of the things that we all have also talked about. When you have the strategic objectives in place, it's very easy to ask the question: is it on strategy or is it not? The decision
Yeah.
should be very clear, and if it's not clear, what is that person making the decision on? What's their criteria? Because it doesn't seem to be about strategy or on the goal. It seems to be maybe potentially about their own personal opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
we've
that,
also talked to, yeah, go ahead.
there you go.
I was just going to say, we also talked about one of the other things that came up about not knowing how they compared to other firms in New Zealand. We benchmarking, right? This is what IT Simply is doing. You need to know where you are, because this is going to circle back to what I started with about the slide. Like, you think you're doing really well because you keep doing the same thing. And in all actuality, you're sliding down the bottom of that.
And that was a firm when I rang and I was looking for a reference site, and I try and share those around. And I rang a manager who we'd put benchmarking in maybe a month before, and I said, "How's it going?" And she goes, "I love it so much," and loves such a strong emotive word. I'm like, it's benchmarking. Come on, it's not your kid or a pet or anyway, or a yacht. And I said, "Why is that?" And she said, "Because trying to tell the story to the partners of what is happening in the firm quite often was met with an excuse. For example, their hourly rate was slipping. They knew that because of practice intelligence. What they didn't know is how the industry was looking. Oh, but the industry's down at the moment, it's really quiet. When they got benchmarking, the average hourly rate was going up. So she could say, look, the rest of the industry is doing this, our rate's going down. Now, if your strategy is to build your hourly rate, that's really, really important. So having that benchmarking is something to say, here's the reality. And that's the next thing I wanted to say too. There's a thing that I use just about every committee and board meeting I'm in, a decision-making process at home, whatever. And it's an acronym, and I don't like acronyms that much, but it is GROW. So the first thing is we've got to go. That is your strategy. Your goal is your strategy. You need a starting point though. So the starting point for the R is your reality. What's the reality right now? And that's got to be the stripped down, absolutely honest truth reality. What is the reality right now? Well, the reality right now is we've got 2 vineyards that come to us for their law work, and we want to be biggest in the industry. That's the reality. That's your starting point. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
It's just we're starting. So how do we get from there to there? If it's a shipping company, we're going from one.
Yeah, and don't do it based on what you perceive. Base it on facts. Like your example, that the perception was that the industry hourly rate was sliding, when in actual reality it was increasing. Right? Don't fool yourselves with what you believe. Make sure you check.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
so
the acronym O is your opportunity. So what's the opportunity in this? So what's the we've got the start and the end. What's the opportunity? The opportunity is the firm's going to grow. The opportunity is we can hire more people. If we focus on an industry, we can then be really efficient in that industry, better hourly rate, then we can pay our staff better, we can pay bonuses, whatever. And then what's the way forward is your W. So that's what's step 1? What's the first step you take to go forward? We know where we're going. We know it's that direction. We know what it looks like. But on that journey, my analogy is a shipping company, we're going to get different weather, we're going to get different things thrown at us. That's fine, because we know what the destination is. We might be blown off course. It's okay. We can then readjust and get back on course again. But all of those things like COVID, to your point before, things like COVID. So COVID hit us. Okay, so that's just
hurricane.
Yeah. It's about 4 hitting at once. It's a perfect storm, but it is okay. So we now need to think about how we meet with those clients or talk to vineyards or whatever it is a different way. We're not going to travel. We can't go to these events. We can't whatever. Change your, go back to your course. We know where we're heading and do it. So I really like that analogy. So that's what's our goal. So that's the strategy. What's our reality? That is the mess we're in at the moment, potentially. We need to dig out of the hole before we start climbing. What's the opportunity? So what does it mean for the firm? And then what's your way forward? So what's your first step? What are the actions we're going to take till now? And don't just leave it sitting on the desk, because we've seen that really often. People go back to work and go get busy. get really busy, and suddenly the strategy is falling behind. So what is it that you, and the other important part I said before is resource the strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. Resource it and review it. So when you
Yes.
have partner meetings, when you have your XCOM meetings, how are you doing according to the strategy you put in place and your measurables? You need to do a checkup on yourself. Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things to go forward from here. A lot of people have their strategic meetings before the end of the financial year to go on to the next one.
Right.
So that's early next year. So thinking about it over Christmas, etc. Of course, you're going to think about that and nothing else. But if even from a management point of view, bringing somebody in from outside is a really good thing to do at a strategic meeting. Because what you don't then do is live in your little world. It's someone you come in and saying, let's take you through a structured strategy planning session.
Yeah.
What does marketing look like in that? What does this look like in that? What does that look like? If it is to go into one industry, what impact does that have on the rest of your team? Suddenly, actually, we're not going to do conveyance anymore because that's not part of our strategy. So are we going to sell that off, or are we going to divide off to another, whatever? But bring somebody in to take you through a really structured strategic meeting so that you've got the outcome you want. And the other one is, it needs to be around reality. So there's a thing called BHAG, the Big Hairy Audacious Goal. Who came up with that? Was that?
Oh, who cares?
I can't remember. It might have been Bill. Big Hairy Audacious Goal. That's fine to have a big hairy audacious goal, but if you don't resource it, or if it's unrealistic, it's impossible, then what's the point of putting that in? So making sure, push yourselves, but make sure that you have that the goal is achievable and you can plan it.
Yeah, the thing about the reality part and the achievable part, it does have a lot to do with people's perceptions, right? People can actually do a lot more than they think. And one of the business people that I listen to, he talks about Genesis deadlines. And the reason why he talks about Genesis deadlines is because when he puts a team under a ridiculous pressure, they achieve way more than they would have ever achieved having given them a sort of mediocre pressure. And they realize that they can actually do way more than they thought they could. People often give themselves excuses. And when I work with people, there was a comment that somebody gave me the other day. When he achieved more billable hours for the day than what was the expectation, he actually felt really proud about himself and how he did. And nobody can take that pride away from him. Now, when he underperformed, right, then he felt like a lazy prick. So sorry, but it's true, right? So the thing about it is you have to understand that when your expectations of somebody, it's not too high, like you said, right? It can't go into the stratosphere where it's like, oh, we're going to be on Mars tomorrow, right? Elon Musk is not trying to be on Mars tomorrow. He understands that there's things that need to happen beforehand. The fact that he can catch a rocket is pretty cool.
That's really cool. I mean, it's diabolical, but it's really cool. I think quite often as well, it was a comment made ages ago at a conference we were at, that law firms are quite often lightly managed, which means you don't have a big management team. Don't have a marketing manager and a strategic manager and an HR manager, etc. Quite often that's all left to the manager and their admin team. Yeah. So resourcing the strategy by bringing in an expert. So if it's a marketing thing, then bring in a marketing person. If it's the culture's not quite right to get to that goal, then bring Lindley in to come and work with your team.
Yep.
If there's a partner within the firm who's always against the strategy because they're just that sort of person, you mentioned the name before that might come up again.
Mismatcher.
Yeah. Well, it was the prick. But anyway, if you've got a mismatch with the firm and they're always going against the grain, then you need to do something about that. That's part of your strategy. We have to exit that partner because they're not part of the strategy. They're always trying to trip it up. You can be the devil's advocate to a point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But everybody on the same page makes a much happier and a better cultured firm than if everybody's just let's just hope that the business comes in this year.
Yeah.
I know a lot of firms do have a strategic meeting once a year. It's so important. Funnily enough, the outcome of having a great strategy is a lot of those things that people found really frustrating, the micromanaging, people not knowing what they're doing, the interruptions, etc., everyone not being on the same page will disappear, pretty much disappear if you get a good strategy in place for the firm.
Yeah, absolutely. So have the strategy, make sure you have measurables, make sure that you are have milestones, make sure that you have the goal, the reality, the opportunity, and the way forward. Have all of those things in place, and make sure that you are continuing to review, because without it, you're that's where the wavering will definitely come in. Any last thoughts, Sam, for everybody with regards to strategy? I know we know that the practice intelligence and your benchmarking will really help people to understand where they are from a measurement perspective. And that's it makes life so much easier for that. So let's use the resources we can.
Yeah. There's we're launching in the new year that we'll have for elite users for a start, but we'll have benchmarking without practice intelligence. We still put the whole of practice intelligence in, but you only get 2 dashboards, and then you can have the benchmarking, so you can see that if you are wanting to be a top earner within the industry, or you're trying to slow down your staff churn or whatever that might be, then we'll have that ready for you. But look, practice intelligence is really inexpensive. I think it's 30 minutes of chargeable time per author per month. That's it. And you've got all that data at your fingertips. So instead of trying to with data, with a lot of partners and law firms would admit they don't, when they look at a spreadsheet, the numbers don't jump out and tell a story as it would if you're an accountant. Then having visualized data that's up to date up until last night means that strategic plan, you can see that you're achieving it as you go along. But just give me a call, and happy to take you through it.
Awesome. Fantastic. So that's strategy. And we have a big suite of things we're going to be talking about next year.
Yeah. We need to plan that out.
So we're working on our strategy for next year. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody in January, February in the new year.
Perfect. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye.